In the heart of New York City's West Village, nestled on a quiet cobblestone-lined street, stands a 19th-century townhouse with a story its owners would rather forget. The previous occupants warned of strange happenings, but the house's charm and prime location proved irresistible to Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick, who moved in with their 3 children in 2020. Little did they know, this house had a chilling history that refused to stay buried. The first sign something was amiss came in the form of small inconveniences. Keys vanishing from the front hall, a favorite mug disappearing only to reappear days later in a locked cabinet. The couple joked about city gremlins until their housekeeper, Maria Alvarez, quit abruptly after claiming to see a man in old-fashioned clothing staring at her from the kitchen window on the 3rd floor. Maria wasn't the only one to sense something was wrong. The couple's eldest son, James, often spoke of hearing whispers when he climbed the stairs at night. But it wasn't until the autumn of 2023 that the house's malevolence revealed itself fully. On a chilly October evening, the family hosted a dinner party for a few close friends. Among them was Jessica Stern, a well-known historian specializing in New York's architecture. As she admired the home's ornate moldings, her gaze fell on a faded inscription carved into the base of the fireplace. "Forgive me, Alice." Jessica's face paled. "Do you know about the Perry Street murders?" she asked. The room grew quiet as she recounted the grisly tale of a young maid named Alice Harding, who disappeared in 1874. Her employer, a wealthy financier named Theodore Winslow, was accused of her murder after bloodstains were found on the cellar floor. Winslow was acquitted due to lack of evidence, but rumors of his guilt lingered. 2 months after the trial, he leapt to his death from the house's rooftop. The story unsettled the guests, but the evening continued. As the last visitors left, Matthew noticed something odd. A candlestick from the dining table was missing. "Probably one of the kids moved it," Sarah shrugged. The next morning, they found the candlestick. It was lying in the cellar, caked in dust, next to a dark smear on the floor that hadn't been there before. Sarah tried to dismiss it as a prank, but when she touched the candlestick, she swore she heard a faint gasp like someone exhaling their last breath. The cellar, once a favorite spot for storing wine, became a place everyone avoided. Things escalated quickly. Sarah's assistant, Chloe, arrived one afternoon to find the front door wide open, though she was certain she had locked it behind her. In the living room, the grand mirror above the fireplace was shattered. Standing amidst the shards was a woman's silhouette etched into the glass, her face obscured by shadows. The family began experiencing sleepless nights. Sarah woke up repeatedly at 3:15 a.m., always hearing faint footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway. Matthew, a skeptic by nature, started locking their bedroom door after waking to find the window open, despite the freezing December air. The final straw came just before Christmas. Sarah invited a medium, Eleanor Bryant, to cleanse the home. Eleanor spent hours moving room to room, muttering prayers and burning sage. When she reached the cellar, she froze. "There's someone here," she whispered. "A man. He's angry, but it's not you he wants. He's looking for her." "Her who?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Alice. He's waiting for Alice." That night, the family packed their bags and left. They never spent another night in the Perry Street house, choosing instead to rent a modern apartment far from the West Village. The townhouse has since been placed on the market, listed discreetly under a private broker. But those who pass by claim they still see flickering lights in the windows and hear whispers when the wind is still. The realtors insist it's just the old pipes, but the ones who know the story never linger long enough to find out. Would you dare spend a night on Perry Street? Months after the Parker Broderick family vacated the Perry Street house, whispers of its haunted reputation began circulating among neighbors. Local coffee shop conversations buzzed with speculation. A few brave or foolish urban explorers claimed to have snuck in, though none stayed for long. One such explorer, Ethan Cross, posted an eerie photo online. The cellar door, half open, with what appeared to be claw-like scratches gouged into the wood. The post went viral, but Ethan deleted it soon after, refusing to explain why. Jessica Stern, the historian who had first mentioned the Perry Street murders, couldn't get the house out of her mind. Drawn to its dark past, she began digging deeper into archival records. What she found made her blood run cold. The police files from 1874 contained an overlooked detail. Alice Harding's body was never found, but neighbors at the time reported strange occurrences after her disappearance. A laundress who worked in the house claimed to have heard crying in the middle of the night. A stable boy once stumbled into the parlor, pale and trembling, muttering about a woman in the mirror. The Winslow family dismissed these stories as superstition until Theodore's leap from the rooftop. Jessica's research unearthed an even darker revelation. Theodore Winslow had a twin brother, Nathaniel, who disappeared around the same time Alice did. Nathaniel had been known for his volatile temper and was suspected of numerous crimes, though nothing was ever proven. One chilling diary entry from Theodore hinted at something sinister. Nathaniel's rage grows. I fear it will consume us both, and her blood will stain this house forever. Jessica shared her findings with Eleanor Bryant, the medium who had cleansed the house. Eleanor reluctantly agreed to help investigate further, though she warned Jessica, some houses don't want their secrets uncovered, and some spirits don't want to stay buried. One misty evening, the two women returned to the Perry Street house under the guise of potential buyers. The realtor, eager to offload the property, gladly handed them the keys and left them to explore. Jessica and Eleanor ventured inside, their breath visible in the unnaturally cold air. The house seemed eerily still, but Jessica felt an almost magnetic pull toward the cellar. When she opened the door, the smell of earth and decay was overwhelming. Eleanor hesitated at the threshold, clutching a pendant around her neck. There's something waiting down there, she said, her voice barely audible. As they descended, the flashlight beam wavered, catching glimpses of the room. Dusty shelves, a crumbling wall, and Jessica froze. In the corner, partially obscured by shadows, was a small, childlike handprint in the dirt. Eleanor whispered, "We shouldn't be here." Before Jessica could respond, the cellar door slammed shut above them, plunging the room into darkness. Then the whispering began. It wasn't faint this time. It was clear and guttural, as though coming from all sides. The words were indecipherable, but the tone was unmistakable rage. Eleanor fumbled with a candle and lit it, the flame barely illuminating their terrified faces. "What's happening?" Jessica hissed. "They're here," Eleanor replied, her voice quaking. All of them. As the whispers grew louder, the dirt floor beneath them began to shift, like something or someone was trying to claw its way out. Jessica dropped the flashlight, the beam catching what looked like a pair of empty eye sockets staring back at her from the soil. The candle flickered violently, threatening to extinguish. Eleanor grabbed Jessica's arm. "We need to leave. Now." But the stairs weren't there anymore. The cellar stretched endlessly into blackness, the walls closing in as the whispers turned to screams. "Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." Jessica's heart raced as the walls seemed to shift, pressing closer as if the house itself was alive, trapping them inside. The screams grew deafening, echoing in a way that defied the cellar's small size. Eleanor tightened her grip on Jessica's arm, her voice cutting through the cacophony. "Whatever you do, don't speak to it," she yelled, her words barely audible over the din. Jessica nodded, but her gaze was drawn irresistibly to the floor, where the eye sockets in the soil were now joined by a faint outline of a face. It was gaunt and hollow, its mouth hanging open in an eternal, silent scream. As Jessica stared, a voice low and venomous cut through the chaos. Unlike the others, it wasn't disembodied. It came from directly behind her. "You shouldn't have come back." Jessica spun around, but there was nothing there. The candlelight flickered wildly, casting jagged shadows on the walls. Eleanor dropped to her knees, frantically muttering a prayer in Latin. Her voice trembled, and for a brief moment, the whispers faltered. The oppressive air in the room seemed to lift until a low growl emerged from the darkness. "Alice isn't here," the voice snarled. "But you are." The ground beneath them cracked, splitting in uneven lines that radiated outward like a spider's web. From the largest fissure, a pale, withered hand shot upward, grasping blindly. Jessica screamed as the hand scraped against her leg, leaving a trail of icy numbness in its wake. "Eleanor!" Jessica cried, but the medium was frozen, her eyes wide and unseeing. Her lips moved silently, as if in a trance. Jessica's survival instincts kicked in. She grabbed the fallen flashlight, its beam flickering weakly, and shone it at the hand. The light didn't deter it instead. The hand seemed to reach for it, its bony fingers stretching unnaturally long. In her panic, Jessica stumbled backward into the crumbling wall. Her hand brushed something metallic or rusted, ancient key embedded in the stone. Without thinking, she yanked it free. As soon as the key left its resting place, the house seemed to inhale sharply. The growl turned into a roar, and the entire cellar shook violently. Eleanor snapped out of her trance, gasping for air. "What did you do?" Eleanor demanded, her voice filled with terror. "I don't know," Jessica shouted back, clutching the key tightly. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic. This time they formed words. "Bring it back." Eleanor grabbed Jessica's arm, dragging her toward the staircase now inexplicably visible again, though its steps looked warped and unstable. "Run!" Eleanor shouted. They scrambled up the stairs as the cellar floor gave way, revealing a yawning abyss beneath them. From the depths, dozens of hands reached upward, clawing at the edges of the collapsing earth. As they burst through the door into the hallway, the house fell silent. The sudden stillness was more unnerving than the noise. Jessica slammed the cellar door shut, wedging a chair against it for good measure. Eleanor collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving. "That key," she said, her voice hoarse. "It's part of this. Part of them." Jessica opened her hand, staring at the key. Its surface was etched with strange symbols that seemed to shift under the dim light. "What do we do with it?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's face darkened. "We don't do anything. This isn't over. That key wasn't meant to leave, and now they'll come for it. For us." As if in response, a slow, deliberate knock echoed from the front door. 3 times. Jessica's breath caught. She and Eleanor exchanged a look of dread. "Who would knock at this hour?" Jessica whispered. Eleanor didn't answer. She stood, trembling, and approached the door. When she peered through the peephole, her blood ran cold. Standing on the stoop was a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by shadow. In his hand was a silver candlestick, gleaming faintly in the moonlight. He looked up suddenly, directly at the peephole, though it should have been impossible to see through it. His eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to pierce through Eleanor's very soul. Then he smiled. Eleanor staggered back from the door, clutching her chest as if the mere act of looking at the man had drained the life from her. Jessica rushed to her side. "What did you see?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. Eleanor could barely speak. "It's him. The one she was hiding from. The one who she stopped," her eyes darting to the cellar door as if expecting it to burst open. Jessica turned toward the door and shouted, "Who's out there? What do you want?" The knocking stopped. Silence fell over the house again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was suffocating, as though the air itself had turned against them. Eleanor grabbed Jessica's arm. "Do not open that door." Jessica nodded, but her curiosity was gnawing at her. She glanced at the key in her hand, the symbols now glowing faintly as if alive. Whatever this was, it was connected to the house, to the cellar, and to the man outside. Before either of them could react, a sound echoed from upstairs, a low, rhythmic creak, like footsteps on old wood. "There's someone else in the house," Jessica whispered. Eleanor shook her head. "No, there's something else in the house." The footsteps grew louder, descending the staircase in slow, deliberate movements. The wooden banister groaned under the weight of an unseen presence. Jessica instinctively backed away, her heart pounding. Then they saw it. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was faint at first, like a ripple of smoke in the dim light. As it descended, it took shape, a woman in a tattered maid's uniform, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide and empty. In her hands, she clutched a single candlestick, identical to the one the man outside had held. Jessica felt frozen, her feet glued to the floor. "Alice," she breathed. The figure's head snapped toward Jessica at the sound of her name, her hollow gaze locking onto the key in Jessica's hand. "She wants it," Eleanor whispered. "But giving it to her won't end this." The woman on the stairs began to move faster, her feet gliding over the steps as if she weren't walking at all. The air turned frigid, and the lights flickered violently. Suddenly, the knocking at the front door resumed, harder this time, more insistent. The man outside wasn't going away. "What do we do?" Jessica shouted, her voice breaking. Eleanor grabbed her arm, her face grim. "We leave. Now, that key doesn't belong to either of them, it's a tether. And if they get it, they won't stop with this house." Jessica hesitated. "What do you mean, won't stop? What happens if we take it with us?" Eleanor's silence was answer enough. The knocking turned into pounding, and the sound of splintering would fill the air. Jessica glanced at the door. It was buckling under the force of whatever was outside. Then, a voice spoke, deep and resonant, reverberating through the house. "You can't run. The key belongs to me." Eleanor pulled Jessica toward the back door, but as they moved, the walls began to shudder violently, dust and plaster raining down. The house seemed to groan, as if alive, its structure twisting and warping around them. Jessica clutched the key tighter, feeling its heat sear into her palm. She looked at Eleanor, desperation in her eyes. "What if we destroy it?" she asked. Eleanor shook her head. "It's not that simple. That key is the lock, but it's also the door. If you destroy it, you might open something far worse." The pounding at the front door ceased abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence. Then, from behind them, the unmistakable sound of the cellar door creaking open filled the air. Jessica turned, her blood running cold as she saw it. The man from the stoop stepping out of the darkness, his empty eyes fixed on her. His smile widened as he raised the candlestick, its silver surface reflecting the faint glow of the key. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice a venomous whisper. Eleanor screamed, "Run!" But as Jessica turned to flee, the floor beneath her feet splintered, and she fell into darkness. Jessica hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud, her breath knocked out of her lungs. Darkness enveloped her, thick and oppressive. The key was still clutched in her hand, its edges digging into her palm. Above her, Eleanor's frantic voice echoed. "Jessica, are you alive?" "I'm here," Jessica croaked, her voice shaky. She scrambled to her feet, her flashlight flickering weakly. The beam illuminated what looked like a tunnel, its walls uneven and packed with damp, crumbling earth. But she wasn't alone. The faint sound of breathing ragged, uneven came from the far end of the tunnel. Jessica aimed her flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught a figure hunched over, its face hidden, its body contorted unnaturally. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. The figure straightened slowly, its movements jerky and unnatural. When it turned, Jessica's blood turned to ice. It was Alice, or what was left of her. Her face was gaunt, her skin a translucent gray. Her eyes, empty and hollow, locked onto Jessica with a mix of longing and fury. "You shouldn't have come here," Alice said, her voice a ghostly whisper. "He won't let you leave." Who won't let me leave?" Jessica asked, backing away. But before Alice could answer, a shadow loomed behind her, tall and menacing. The man from the stoop emerged, his dark suit immaculate, his hollow eyes glowing faintly. "She's mine," he growled, his voice reverberating through the tunnel. He reached for Alice, who shrank back, her ethereal form flickering like a flame in the wind. "No!" Alice screamed, her voice echoing with a power that shook the ground. "You won't take another." Jessica realized the key was growing hotter in her hand, pulsing with energy. Instinctively, she held it out toward the man. He hesitated, his smile fading. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Jessica ignored him. Her heart pounded as she tightened her grip on the key. "If this is the door, then I'm closing it. For good." Alice turned to her, desperation in her eyes. You can't close it. You have to lock him away. But it'll cost you. What does that mean? Jessica asked, panic creeping into her voice. Alice's form flickered again, and her voice softened. Someone has to stay. A guardian. That's how the key works. That's why I'm still here. The man's growl deepened. Don't listen to her. The key is mine. Give it to me and you can leave. Jessica looked between them, her mind racing. Could she trust Alice? Or was the man trying to manipulate her? From above, she heard Eleanor shouting. Jessica, don't trust either of them. Get out while you can. But there was no way out. The tunnel was collapsing, and the walls were closing in. The key was burning in her hand now, its symbols glowing brighter than ever. Jessica made her decision. She stepped toward Alice and held out the key. Lock it. Lock him away. Do whatever you have to do. Alice's eyes widened in surprise, and for a brief moment, her ghostly form looked almost human. She reached out, her fingers brushing the key. As she touched it, the tunnel exploded with light. The man let out a guttural scream, his form distorting as he lunged for the key. But it was too late. Alice thrust the key into the air, and a massive, blinding door appeared, a door made of light and shadow, its edges crackling with energy. Alice turned to Jessica one last time, her expression both grateful and mournful. Thank you. I'll make sure he never escapes. With that, she stepped into the door, dragging the screaming man with her. The door slammed shut behind them, and the key fell to the ground, its glow fading. Jessica collapsed as the tunnel around her began to crumble. She closed her eyes, bracing for the end, but when she opened them, she was lying on the floor of the Perry Street living room, Eleanor kneeling beside her. You're back, Eleanor said, her voice shaky. Jessica sat up, clutching the now cool key in her hand. The house was eerily quiet, the oppressive air gone. It's over, Jessica whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Eleanor helped her to her feet. Maybe, but that key, it's still dangerous. Jessica looked at the ancient, unassuming object in her hand and nodded. Then we make sure no one ever finds it again. The two women left the house, leaving the cellar door wide open. The Perry Street townhouse was later condemned after reports of structural instability. It remains boarded up, its secrets buried, but on some nights, neighbors still hear faint whispers coming from the cellar. And in the quietest hours, a single knock echoes from deep within the earth. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.